My name is Pedro Romero. I may be Spanish, but I ride for the Italians. What's your name? Beauty Brett seemed to be elated as she extended her hand and mumbled breathlessly, Lady Brett Ashley. If anything could enhance her accent, it was this moment. Com wrapped his arm around her and extended his other hand to Romero. I'm Robert Con. Sorry, but we can't stay. We have a meeting. He then began to pull Brett towards the exit, leaving Britt, Romero, and me standing there in disbelief. It was definitely a rude departure, and I'm sure Romero understood why. With his looks and profession, I imagine he received this kind of treatment quite often from jealous husbands, lovers, and boyfriends. I extended my hand and said, without further ado, Jake Barnes. This is Lady Britt Ashley, Brett's sister. Since the guy had problems with English, I did not try to explain to him the meaning of alliteration. He looked at Britt, and I could see how he was sizing her up. The problem was that he came to the same conclusion as me. Britt was more attractive than Brett. If he had been a Sparrow missile, I would have heard his target lock signal loud and clear. His behavior completely changed. He did everything except not blink in her direction like Pepe Le Pew. He said somewhat too politely, I am very pleased to meet such a beautiful woman. Would you like to see what's behind our boxes? It is very interesting. She replied, thank you. Can Jake come with us? It was a stupid question. He looked at me, put on his most sincerely sorry face, and said, no, sorry, but I can only bring one guest at a time. My jealousy sensor went off the charts. Damn it, what was it? Feelings? It was like a paralyzed man who suddenly finds his legs itching like crazy. Britt looked sorry. She said, then I will have to decline your kind invitation, but you might want to join us for drinks after you finish work for the day. We're having a little party on the Crystal Terrace tonight at El Sen. She smiled sweetly at Romero, then she took me by the arm, turned around, and immediately began to drag me towards the exit of the pits. My heart was filled with joy. Boy, I forgot about the emotions a woman can evoke. This stunning and polite lady just chose to stay with me instead of leaving with the most handsome racer in the universe. I wondered what episode of The Twilight Zone I was in. It was both exciting and incredibly scary to realize the depth of feelings I had for Lady Britt Ashley. My first instinct was to ruthlessly suppress them, but Britt was nothing if not kind and polite to me. I wasn't going to reward her show of respect by acting like a jerk. However, I made a promise to myself to never get burned again, and this woman was walking through fire. As we walked, she chatted to me in her fruity academic accent about how technicians adjust fuel and ignition timing parameters wirelessly using onboard propulsion systems. It was alarming. She seemed to be completely oblivious to the fact that the sexiest man in the world had just proposed to her. Or perhaps handsome, bold, and glamorous meant nothing to her. She held my hand on her full left breast as we walked, and I felt its softness in contrast to the hard body to which it was attached. And miracle of miracles, old Lucifer began to wake up. It was so long ago that I almost didn't recognize this feeling. The effect was about the same as if someone came out of a 14-month coma. Meanwhile, she continued to talk to me in Techi language, and I could not take my eyes off her beautiful face. When we got back to the hotel, I called Gorton. He said Campbell had been drinking all day. I told him about the party and suggested that he keep Mike out of there. Britt stood with me in the hall. I looked at my watch, and we had an hour to change. I asked her if she wanted to have something to drink on the patio. She noted that a woman needs a lot of time and preparation to look effortless, so she said she should go up to her room and do some girly business. I felt disappointed. I think it was noticeable. She gently touched my cheek. It was the first time I had been touched like that since I kissed Janet that historic morning. I think the pain showed on my face because Britt said, "We have to talk about this tonight, Jake. I want to know what you think." This had about 1 million interpretations. I would normally run away from the scene, but I was hopelessly caught in her web. So instead, I smiled and said, "See you at 7. As I shaved, showered, and sauntered out onto the patio at exactly 7, it was like I was back in damn high school, hoping Beverly Johnson would be at the dance. The patio was huge, but the people ConMed had reserved a fenced-off area for the entertainment of a select group of guests. I was everything but the elite. I was there because Britt invited me, but Romero was there too. As Romero approached, a gorilla holding a velvet rope led him into the party. After all, he was a big star. He wasn't as helpful when I approached, so I stayed in the public area waiting for Con or Britt to notice me and invite me. I wasn't as offended as you might think. I'm used to being excluded from something. However, watching the stars having fun in their own special little territory was a valuable lesson for me. Despite all signs of common sense, I began to think about Britt. She seemed so good, kind, smart, and caring. She was a magnificent English rose. She had graceful style and a heartbreakingly attractive sense of self. Her natural honesty and decency only made her even more beautiful. And since all that attractiveness came from her soul and not from her stunning face and body, I knew that she would retain the same beauty when she was 88 years old. I couldn't imagine her living with Romero. She was too classy for someone like him, and he was several years younger. But I wouldn't blame her if she tried it over the weekend. After all, he was a walking symbol. And then there was me. I had already started swinging with a woman who was a relative equal to me in society. I couldn't imagine how awkward it would be going to the plate with a world-class beauty like Britt. Finally, I saw her standing with KH and Brett at the side of the buffet table. She just radiated energy, intelligence, and wit. For the event, she dressed casually in a lightweight silk floral dress that showed off modest, gorgeous cleavage and perfectly shaped legs. She was wearing one of those hats and veils that only upper-class English women can wear. But it was this body in a tight silk dress that spoke eloquently to me. She was excited. Romero advanced towards her as if he were a cruise missile and she was in the center of Pyongyang. They started talking. He stood about 6 inches away from her. She looked a little uncomfortable, but she didn't take a step back. She laughed and held his hand. I assumed she was expressing her interest. I shouldn't have felt anything. Their attraction was natural. She is gorgeous, and so is he. But the problem was that I really felt it, and it really hurt. I was completely disgusted with myself. How could I have let my guard down so much? I said under my breath, "This is a lesson I won't soon forget." I was going to get as far away from beautiful people as possible when Romero said something to Britt. He nodded in my direction. I waved my hand at her weakly. It was a farewell gesture. She looked at me with real anger. I thought, oh damn, she thinks I'm interfering with her little exciting moment with Romero. So, I turned sharply and walked out the terrace door. I was really angry with myself. An entire year of treatment was simply thrown into the trash because I was too weak and stupid to follow my own rules. I was too upset to just sit in my room, so I headed to the Explorer Public. I was almost sure that I would find Bill and Mike there. I restored my protective screens and was ready for what the Klingons could throw at me. All 3 were on the terrace overlooking me in a harbor. This place is the only deep water port on the Côte d'Azur, and it has been there since Hercules was here in the good old days. Bill was glad to see me. I think one of the reasons was Mike. It looked like this guy needed some control tonight. I had no reason to sympathize with Mike because I had no rights to another sister, but honestly, getting drunk sounded like a great idea. Mike continued to tell us what he was going to do with Com when he got his hands on him. I finally said, "Look, Mike, it's not Con's fault. Brett is just that kind of woman. You can't change her. You need to let her go, or she will destroy your soul. And if it's any consolation, Com will end up in the same situation as you once she gets tired of him. What I wanted to say was, don't waste your time on a narcissistic, expletive like Brett, but I knew for sure that this would start a fight. I was also thinking about my unfortunate situation with Britt. I understood that Britt was not a girl like her sister, but the prospect of seeing her and Romero locked in a sweaty embrace a couple of hours later didn't do me any good either. I had a few beers with them while we talked. It was truly a stimulating time spent in ideal conditions getting an education in Formula One racing. I was born and raised in NASCAR country, and the idea of Italians, Germans, French, and Brits racing down picturesque little European streets in miniature cars seemed pretty funny to me. It wasn't until I saw these cars in action that Dale Jr.'s Chevrolet suddenly seemed tame and underpowered. Both Bill and the Kuwaiti were betting on the upcoming race, and it turned out that Romero was at the top of the list of potential winners. I knew he would be a big winner tonight. That was enough for me, and the conversation wasn't helping because Campbell kept coming back to how Brett had hurt him. I finally said, "Grow up, Mike. You have to learn to let go of the things that are hurting you." I was actually talking to myself. Campbell jumped out of his chair as if he was going to hit me. I managed to dodge, and Bill grabbed him in the same grip he had used earlier in the day. He quickly said, "Thank you for the evening, Ollie. See you back on the boat," and he led his friend out, muttering, "Come on, you stupid expletive." Ollie looked at me, and I smiled and said sadly, "You need to help him understand that he can't make something happen that just can't happen." I was talking to myself again. He said, "I'll try, my friend. In the meantime, please join us on my boat tomorrow. You are more than welcome, and by the way, bring with you this beautiful woman who is so passionate about you." I asked in surprise, "What beautiful woman?" I don't remember a single beautiful woman in my life, at least not one that was ever infatuated with me. He said, "Lady Brett's sister, of course. Is there anyone else?" His tone said he thought I was joking. I just sat there stunned. I said, "Why do you say that?" "She is undoubtedly somewhere very intimately involved in personal matters with Pedro Romero right now." Ollie laughed and said, "If she is with him, it is only because you let her go." He then stood up, threw a couple of €100 on the table, and left. I was still thinking about his words when my phone rang. I thought it was Bill telling me about Mike's condition. Instead, it was the only other person in Monte Carlo who had my phone number. It was KH, who sounded worried. He said, "You need to meet me in the hall immediately," then he hung up. Damn it, Romero took Britt away. I figured he'd seduce her tonight, but kidnapping? I crossed the street, dodging the furious Monaco traffic. This was a situation that required all hands on deck, and I was in a panic. I even remembered thinking, I thought Britt was such a noble woman. I'm such a fool. They are all the same. When I walked through the door, KH was nervously pacing the hall like a typical locked animal. I ran up to him and said breathlessly, "Robert, where is she? I'll kill him if he hurts her." He looked concerned and said, "It's Brett. She's disappeared. I think she's with that guy Romero." At that moment, a concerned voice came from behind me, "Jake, are you okay? Where have you gone?" I turned around, and there she stood, looking at me with concern. She was the epitome of beauty and elegance. It was instant. The protective screens exploded, the walls collapsed, and I was unconditionally in the game with this woman. I realized this sounds stupid, but seeing her like this, my heart soared. If love is a feeling of absolute connection, then I was truly and unconditionally in love with her. Britt is very smart. She instantly understood the picture. I didn't need to say a word to explain myself. I saw a look of compassion and understanding on her face, and I thought I noticed something else. I said, "I thought you were with Romero." She looked shocked and said, "Why did I have to be with him? I was sitting here waiting for you to come back after you ran away." She seemed calm but worried. She certainly knew what I was thinking and gave me the benefit of the doubt over my lack of trust in her. I looked into those smart grey eyes, confused. I said, "It doesn't matter. We can talk later." Then I turned back to Robert and said, "How can we help?" He said, "You left and Brett went looking for you. When she didn't return, I went out to see where she was. She said she was waiting for you here, so I came back. Romero and Brett were both gone. That's when I called you." I was still struggling with my emotions. Britt was waiting for me, but I said, "Let's think about it. There are only two places they could go, the motorhome that follows these guys from race to race or the pits themselves." I thought he was going to use the same trick on Brett that he tried to use on Britt earlier that day, only I was sure that Brett would be an easier target. The last thing I wanted was for Con to discover Romero and Brett having happy sex. So I said, "Why don't you check out his motorhome? They're most likely there. There's a comfortable bed there." I knew we would find them in the pits, but by sending Con elsewhere, I hoped to prevent his arrest for the murders of both of them. He said, "Yes, this sounds right. I'll meet you here as soon as I find her," and he rushed away. I turned to Britt and said, "I thought you and Romero would be together tonight. That's why I left. I couldn't bear the thought of you being with him." She looked surprised and cheerful. She said, "Why did you even think I might be interested in that boy? Is that woman there even interesting to you?" She pointed to one of the heavily busty, scantily clad women who had just left a party on a yacht in the harbor. I said, "God no, there's probably not a part of her body that hasn't been artificially enhanced. I like women who are real, and I might add, with an IQ above room temperature. I may be a typical man, but I need to somehow connect with a person before I want to get close to them." She laughed cheerfully and said, "My thoughts are exactly the same. Romero is not someone I would ever contact in that way." We walked hand in hand to the pits. I was absolutely sure that we would find them there. It was a wonderful night. The temperature was ideal, with light breezes carrying the delicate scent of flowers from the hills. After the day's chaos and intensity, it was peaceful in the pits. There were still mechanics quietly working on the cars in the illuminated shelters behind the wall of the pits. There were also guards everywhere. Most of them recognized us from that day, but I think it was Britt's beauty that actually gave us a free pass. A beautiful woman can achieve a lot with French and Italian guards. We walked past the Ferrari pits and headed towards the temporary sheds where extra tires and spare parts were stored. I was glad Britt was with me because I knew I would need her help with her sister. I wasn't afraid of Romero. He might have been a champion behind the wheel, but I was almost half a foot taller and 100 pounds heavier. However, I thought that if we interrupted Brett halfway through, I would need Britt's help to pry her claws off my hide. We quietly opened the barn door and heard what was happening. I felt uneasy. Meanwhile, Britt stood nearby, looking as calm as Wellington at Waterloo. She had either seen something like this before or was just so calm. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a garden hose to turn on them, like I do with dogs at home, and they did not offend anyone except perhaps Con. The problem is that he suddenly appeared right behind us. He apparently realized that I was trying to send him on a wild goose hunt and followed us. He took one look at Romero and rushed past us. He hit Romero in the ribs with his shoulder. It was something he must have done to countless Princeton and Yale quarterbacks during his years playing for Harvard. Romero let out a cry of pain, flew into the air, and landed on his back several feet to the side. If he wasn't completely unconscious, he was clearly dazed. He looked absurd lying there not moving. The entire time, Britt and I stood side by side, stunned. I was ashamed of both of them. I had no other ideas except some great desire to get out of there. We turned around and left, closing the door behind us. We silently walked back to the hotel. When we arrived in the hall, Britt sharply turned to face me. There was a serious and determined look on her face as she said those anxious 5 words, "Jake, we need to talk." I sincerely said, "I know. Where do you want to do it?" The obvious place for privacy was my room, but that was far from the context that we both wanted to create. As the plan evolved, I said, "I heard that the exotic garden is a good place to sit at night if you want to be alone." She said, "Thank you." It didn't sound as strange as it might have seemed. She thanked me for not inviting her to my room to look at my engravings. I parked the Evoque in a small lot down the street from the garden entrance. It was relatively quiet and peaceful as we entered the garden and then walked down the terraces to a place where we could sit and look out over the Mediterranean Sea and Ville Monaco to the left. The sky was literally deep purple with a million stars interspersed with it. The Mediterranean at night is a special place. The silence and beauty of the surroundings were breathtaking. We found a bench. She sat down next to me, turning towards me but not touching me. She wasn't unfriendly, she just wanted some space. It wasn't romance. This was supposed to be a serious conversation between 2 intelligent people. I recognized the similarities in our approaches. We both handled things the same way. I said, "When I saw you with Romero, it almost killed me. I don't really know you, and I was afraid that you might turn out like your sister. In retrospect, I very sincerely regret that I ever entertained that thought." She said, "Your mistake is clear. He really clearly harassed me while you were watching us." This was probably reflected in his gestures. I kept pushing him away to make room, but he continued to force himself on me. "I didn't know you came until he pointed at me. I could imagine what you were thinking about what was going on between him and me, and that made me angry. He was clearly trying to give you that impression. Then you ran away without giving me a chance to explain. I was looking for you, but you had already disappeared, so I just sat in the hall and waited. I knew that you would return sooner or later. Then Robert came along, and you know the rest. Why are you so upset? I would have approached you as soon as I knew you were here. Does this have anything to do with that cloud that always hangs over you?" I said, "I came home from work one afternoon, and my wife of 5 years simply announced that she was leaving me for the man with whom she had been having an affair for 6 months. I trusted her, and I didn't see it coming. Since that day, I have not had the slightest confidence in the moral character or integrity of anyone, especially a woman. I never get close enough to anyone to let them prove otherwise. I don't want to be like this, alienated. It's just the way I am and have been for the last 14 months. I came to France to try to repair the damage done to my self-esteem. I needed to gain a new understanding of who I am and a healthier direction in life. I thought I was starting to recover, but then I saw you and Romero interacting the way you were, and it was déjà vu. I couldn't bear the pain, so I went looking for Bill and Mike. Mike is that poor unfortunate guy who gave his heart to Brett. I thought I knew how he felt. I realized that I was terribly wrong about you, and I'm sorry. I hope we can get to know each other better." She looked at me with wide, glowing eyes. "I sincerely believe that you are an intelligent and balanced woman who is straightforward and honest. You're as different from Brett as I am from Con. Their behavior is not even close to what any of us would consider normal." Then she became deadly serious. She said, "Do you see me in the same light as your ex-wife?" This got me thinking. I said, "Janet was smart, funny, and beautiful just like you. There was just a fundamental flaw that I didn't notice. In my opinion, you are the ideal woman, beauty, intelligence, and kindness in one bottle. In the very short time that I have known you, your obvious intelligence and superior sense of self-worth have drawn me to you in a way that I have never experienced in my life. I honestly think you are as real as you seem, but I really can't judge until I get to know you better. I would like to try to do this if you agree." She looked like that was the answer she wanted to hear because she said, "All my life, I've been Lady Brett Ashley's little sister. No one has ever judged me for who I am or what I do. They just see me as a younger version of Brett, and the last thing I want is to be like her. I have had several lovers, and perhaps I like sex more than she does, but there has to be something between me and a man before I would even consider allowing him into my body. Without connection, sex is just animal behavior.